Bon matin. Good morning, all. As Michael said, my name is Patrick Pilot. I'm the Associate Director of Programs Operation at CFI. Part of my team's mandate is looking at research security considerations at the CFI. So I will briefly go through that. A couple of housekeeping things before we get started. I'll do most of the talking in English probably, but feel free to intervene in French or English, no problem, aucun problème. I also want to mention or highlight the fact that two people from my team are here today. Please catch them during the breaks or anything if you have any questions, including myself. So both Véronique Goujon and Georges Moubayed are in the back, both from our team, also looking at some of the research security aspects at the CFI. So what I'll do today with this, about 1 hour session is I've got about 10 minutes worth of slide. And after that, I want to really turn it out to you all, and I want to get into a bit of a discussion about, what are some of the challenges. I'll put in some questions. So it's really trying to be interactive here. That's what I'm trying to do. So very briefly, first thing I'm going to do is explain a little bit what's our current approach with research security right now. And this is not MSI fund specific or anything like that. But basically right now, our current approach aims at mitigating two types of risks. One risk related to partnership with private sector partner, and that's in line with the National Security Guidelines for Research Partnerships that the Government of Canada issued some time ago, I guess. I can't remember now, probably over a year ago. And the second is risk related to affiliations or concerns for projects that are aiming to advance sensitive technology research area related to the sensitive technology research and affiliations of concerns policy, known as the STRAC policy. That is also a Government of Canada policy that's been published last year. I'll briefly go through what that means for us. So that's for the National Security Guideline for Research Partnerships. So that's the part where we try to mitigate risks with private sector partners. Essentially what we're doing is asking for risk assessment form and private sector partner identification form if the project involve a partnership with a private sector that meets one of these criteria. And I'll let you read them if you want. The table at the top, essentially, I just want to attract your attention to the fact that the Major Science Initiative Fund is not in scope of that particular requirement because the funding was made prior to these requirements becoming active at the CFI. That doesn't mean that it's going to stay like that forever. That table used to have not yet in scope. Eventually, I think it's something we're going to have to look into as well. That's a bit part of the discussion perhaps we can have later. The second policy, so the STRAC policy about the affiliations of concern, basically applies at our end. How the requirements are set up is that project and team leaders and team members, so if you've ever submitted a CFI application, it's usually the people who provide some sort of CV in their application. If they're involved in a proposal that aims to advance one of the sensitive technology research area, as defined by the Government of Canada, they need to provide an attestation saying that they are not affiliated with anybody from a list of named research organizations, which is another list provided by the Government of Canada, essentially saying if you're participating in this project as one of the team leader or team members, you cannot be affiliated with anybody from that list. And that's been applied to our infrastructure funding starting earlier last year. But again, I will attract your attention to the fact that the Major Science Initiative Fund, not in scope, again, because that applies at application stage, and that was done much earlier than for the MSI, that was done much earlier than when those requirements came into effect. Now, So what the CFI is doing in the next little while, if you wish, we're starting to have some discussions here today with some of the facilities, but also with the community at large, about some other risks that are specific to the infrastructure. I've put like 3 categories here today just for sort of high-level discussion, if you wish. One is risk associated with procurement of infrastructure. This is also something you might have seen late last year, ICED provided some guidance on their safeguarding your research website about that, and some guidance that might be useful for institutions when they look at procurement from a research security standpoint. There are risks associated with unauthorized access to the infrastructure, so we're talking about physical security to your facilities. We're talking about cybersecurity to prevent cyber attacks and things like that. But there's also risk associated with authorized access to your infrastructure, right? It's not like the people who are not supposed to be in your facilities, the people who are supposed to be in your facilities, but that might have malicious intent. And a couple of potential risk here. There might be some, what are the affiliations of the external and internal users working on projects that are aiming to advance a sensitive technology area, right? And I'll go into a bit more detail right after this slide on that. Also, what's the level of access of the users to your facility, right? One of the good principles is you have access to everything you need, but just everything you need, not everything else, right? So this is also something to consider with the risk associated with authorized access to your facility. So I think today what I'd like to do, but this is about you, not about me, so if you want to go somewhere else, we'll go somewhere else. But what I'm proposing, I guess, is to focus a little bit on that part of the risk that I just enumerated. And there's a risk associated with this authorized access. So as I talked about a little bit earlier, right now our approach focuses on team or project leaders and team members. And as I said, for the largest CFI project, this is up to 10 people. And if these people are involved in a project that aims to advance a sensitive technology research area, then they need to provide an attestation that they're not affiliated, and so on and so forth. But currently, that approach does not systematically address risk associated with any other users. And I think given the fact that we're talking here about major science facilities that typically have a large number of users, I think that's the type of discussion that's definitely warranted to know what is there something more to be done there, and if, what could or should be done. So I've got a few questions and about 12 backup slides. But this is sort of start the discussion, right? Or to get our minds thinking about this. So first thing, do you currently have any processes in place to mitigate those risks? Right, to people that have access to your facility, be they external, internal users. Do you connect any information, and especially on the external users, right? Because typically your internal users, you might have more information, you know them. If they're part of an application, for instance, you have their CV, you have some information. But the external users, do you collect any information? Do you know who they are? Is there any concern? And if you do, what are you collecting? When are you collecting it? In advance, once they're there? And what are the challenges, right, in getting that information? Because I think if I look at the facilities here, there's a wide range, right? You might have like physical facility where physical access is necessary for most of the things. You might have facilities where it's all data and everybody gets access to the data, right? So it's all different. So it's interesting for us to understand a little bit what the different challenges might be. Well, I guess I've sort of alluded to the third point. Is the interaction different depending on your relationship with that user, right? If it's a user that needs to go to the facility, it's one thing. If it's like a valet service, can people send you like samples and you run the samples, for instance? How is that relationship different? And how do you deal or handle that? So this is my 10-minute sort of get the ball rolling presentation. And really what I want to do is open the floor. I'm interested in answer to these questions, other questions, concerns, worries, anything. Really, we're taking this opportunity here today that you're all in the room to sort of start the conversation, understand a little bit where some of the challenges might lie or some of your concerns might be, because we're going to be continuing that discussion because I think it's an important one that we need to have.
Good morning. Just a question, I guess, in terms of MSIs that house innovation fund technology in them or equipment. I'm wondering if invariably they have to have a research security plan in order to address the innovation fund criteria around research security.
Right. So from a requirement standpoint, if if a project, which is an innovation fund, or it could be a John R. Evans Leaders Fund, the requirements are essentially the same at this point. They have to abide by both of these policies, right? Our requirements related to national security guidelines and our requirements to the STRAC policy. So that remains for the duration of those awards. So these people, like for instance, if there's a new private sector partner that comes in the middle of their project, they need to let us know because of the requirements related to national security guidelines. I don't necessarily expect, I mean, this is for you to iron out, but I don't necessarily expect the facility to be involved in that relationship with the CFI necessarily on that front. But they have requirements throughout the duration of the project for these two guidelines. Right. Nigel.
So Nigel Smith, Triumph Director. We're not an MSI, we're under NSERC funding and NRC funding. And as part of that requirement, we do have to have in place a research security policy and structure. So we've been engaged in this for several years, trying to develop policies against STRAC. A couple of points. One is, one of the things that we're finding challenging is the provincial component, in that the provinces have different approaches to research security across the country. And as an MRF type organization, it's challenging to work out exactly what you have to do, because we have users from all across the country and internationally, so it's not always clear which policy needs to be adopted. And I think some help from CFI and the government in terms of defining what is a consistent set of policies across the country would actually be really helpful. At the moment, you end up having to take the most draconian, which is Ontario, and trying to apply that to the approach. I think the second one, again, is picking up on the resources. This is not a cheap thing to do. Right. We've been actually relying on through the we're not eligible for RSF funding, which is how the government has been supporting the universities in terms of research security. So we've actually been relying on the University of Calgary, that's one of our members, and has been supporting our efforts in developing this. But the tools themselves become quite expensive. So the tools that are required to determine is a user, declared user, part of an affiliation of concern. There are tools that the universities are using to do that, can be relatively expensive. So I think the second component would be if there was a mechanism to streamline access to those sort of tools for the MRFs, the MSIs, rather than relying on ad hoc relationships to universities, that would also be very, very advantageous.
Yeah. Thank you, Nigel. I think for the first one about the provincial landscape, I'm not surprised to hear that. If anything, I'm surprised it was the second intervention, not the first, perhaps. But I mean, it is certainly something that we've heard before. This is something that was definitely brought up. I know ISED has been working with some provinces to try to see if there can be additional alignments. Obviously, these are separate jurisdiction that we don't necessarily have access to make changes, but certainly that's been brought up. I know some other provinces are sort of gearing up their research security apparatus, and from what I understand, there seemed to be interest with a lot of alignment with the federal approaches for those that are actually going through this at the moment. I mean, jury's still out, and we'll see how that pans out. But I take your point that this is an additional complexity. I mean, one question I might have, and maybe for further discussion throughout the day when if we see each other, but it's what's the facility's responsibility versus the researcher's responsibility in that sense, right? I mean, if facility is in one area, obviously they have the jurisdiction related to where they're sitting physically. If they have others from other jurisdiction, what's your mandate on this to respect the jurisdiction of the other places? And I think that's something that warrants digging a little bit more into, because there's Canadian users, but I mean, you've got international users as well, right? So what are the expectations on that front? So I understand that. And to your second point about this is not a free thing. Understood. Certainly, there was some money in the research support fund for that in the can't remember, it was 2 years budget. I can't remember when it was exactly. But yeah, I take your point. Obviously, that's not something I can say anything about right now, but point taken. Yes, Tim.
Tim West, Director of Operations from the Canadian Light Source. So when the talk around Peace Track was emerging a few years ago, we realized on some of your slides as well, the risk to our cybersecurity, physical security, and understanding that the majority of the work within our facility fell into the sensitive technology areas, especially when you consider dual use. So we started taking a fairly serious approach, and then when Peace Track came out, we did make modifications to our user portal, so that's where all users flow into our organization. And we made some changes to ensure that every user, including data users, have an institutional agreement, so whatever institution they come from, that institution is ultimately liable for what happens, as well as they're saying that person is from our institution. And we also have built in attestations based on the Peace Track language into there. And so just adding it into that normal flow, now we do pretty enhanced research security. We also have the open source software to look at any potential red flags. But so far, it has really helped us to be able to keep research security and access into the facility and top of mind with our staff, and just really building into our normal workflows. And luckily, it hasn't really cost too much more, other than it might maybe people time in the future a bit more. But so far, it's been pretty successful, and we haven't had really any pushback from users. Majority of ours are from Canada, and I think they're exposed to it quite a bit at the university level right now. But even the international ones, when we made the changes, we really didn't have any negative reaction from it. So it's been pretty positive.
Do you, if I may, do you do some of that validation yourself once you get it, or do you sort of keep it and eventually work with another security agency for validation?
Yeah, well, so people will attest, and then we don't have the manpower to say to go look up every single user that, and I don't think we'd want to. No. Sometimes we notice red flags where people say they're from one institution, but we actually see that online maybe they're from other ones, and then we'll go looking a little bit. Lots of times that just clears up and it's not an issue. Right. We have the software with our partnership with USAS to be able to go look. There are some higher levels to it where you can actually have APIs and do big batches, but we don't have that at this time, but potentially something like that in the future, if need be.
Right, okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question, sorry, François Légaré from the Advanced Laser Light Source. I have a question regarding the list of organizations with whom we should not collaborate. I understand that this list is updated time to time. Let's say within the review process, a new organization is had on the list, and you are collaborating with this organization, what you should do. And the second question that I don't know, I mean, it's my colleagues asking me the questions, how to handle the fact that sometimes you have worked with those people for a few years, there's work in the pipeline, there's publications in the pipeline, you have students that depends on those publications to graduate. You cannot end a collaboration instantaneously, you know, because it will affect other people, not only you. And this is really, because publications sometimes can take 5 years after the work. And so how to handle this, how to explain this in the, you know, we have to fill some forms to manage the risk, how to address this to make sure that we are transparent with the funding agencies.
So, sorry if I'm not texting friends, I'm taking notes when you ask questions to make sure I addressed all of them. So first, your first question about the changes to the named research organization, so essentially the list of organization. I know that's not what you meant, but I just want to make sure to be very precise on the fact that the collaborations become problematic if you're applying for federal funding, including CFI, on a topic that aims to advance a strategic or a sensitive technology research area. Otherwise, that's not a problem at all to have people collaborating with them. But if I take your case here, if you have an application that is in an area aiming to advance a sensitive technology research area, and the list changes on you, essentially, right, is your question. I mean, the list hasn't changed yet, right? So I mean, there's still, I don't want to, make promises I can't keep, but certainly so far the discussion has been very clear that once there's a change to the list, it applies going forward, and it's not going backward, right? So everything that's been already awarded, or if it's something that's already in a review process, is is fair game, right? The goal is not to change the rules on people halfway through. I mean, the same way that the requirements I talked about earlier do not technically apply to our MSI funding because the awards were made before and the rules were made clear at that time. So that's for the first question. The second question, that also something that's been brought up a few times. The attestation themselves say that the moment the researcher attests, it's at that date they do not have those relationships. That doesn't mean that publication cannot be in the pipeline, right? I mean, this is where it becomes a bit tricky, and ourselves haven't had to deal with this specifically, but I know there's a way to sort of explain that. Look, we're in this process. There might be a publication coming in very shortly. Might have these names on it, but you know, I don't have any particular or specific collaborations or affiliations at that time, and that can be explained. To be honest, I cannot go right now in the exact process for that, but we can do that. Right, so I'm going to leave it there for now. Wait.
Ooh, hi. I can maybe speak a little bit to the question about the publications and students, just to suggest you may, if you are at a university that has a teaching hospital relationship. I used to work at U of T, and in the agreements between U of T and, I mean, including all placements, there's hundreds of placement sites that U of T has agreements with. They would actually have language in those agreements that dealt specifically with if there is an issue. Like the default language would be, if there's an issue, this agreement is null and void. Some of them, the small ones. The bigger hospitals didn't go that extreme at the outset, but we carved out language in there saying, you know, that if there is an issue, that it won't result in damaging the, you know, closing the entire contract, that it'll be dealt just with that person involved. So the teaching hospitals may be a place to, if you work with a teaching hospital, to look for ways to work around that.
Right, okay. Thank you.
Forgot to introduce myself. Fuad Al-Gundi, Queen's University. So just a question in terms of kind of picking up on the changes that happen after the application goes in. In terms of ongoing monitoring of new relationships or engagements that happen, particularly with groups that or with organizations that are on the list, how does CFI interpret the responsibilities to either the institution or the researcher to provide those changes to CFI, and how does that affect the ongoing grant?
Okay.
For first question, second part, I guess, is in the event that there is a research security incident, where does the accountability fall? Does that fall to the institutions, to the researchers, or is it shared? So.
Right, okay. Merci. So I'll go into a little bit more details. I don't know where we go. Like, let's look at the National Security Guidelines for Research Partnerships. And if I say anything stupid, Véronique and George, you just raise your hand and you tell me, right? But essentially, we're looking at a private sector partner that meets one of these criteria. And as I said a little bit earlier, this requirement lasts for the duration of the CFI project. Okay? Again, not the MSI funding. We're looking at other types of CFI projects. If anything changes on that front, over the duration of the project, there's a requirement, actually in the award agreement that we signed with the institution, there is a provision that says, if there's a change on that front, you need to alert us. So obviously we understand that you need to get that information from the researcher, you know, probably. So you need to have that relationship for sure, but given our contract, our sign exclusively with the institutions, the requirements is on the award agreement. And if we look at the other one, it's because it's got two aspects, that one, right? It's whether the project aims to advance a sensitive technology area, and then researchers need to provide on a personal level these attestations. So if if the aims of the research changes throughout the project and sort of veers into a sensitive area, that's where, you know, there's this need to alert us from the institution. Again, this is in the new award agreements that we have. So that's sort of a responsibility to let us know. But the second part, the attestation, is done on a personal level, right? There's no expectation that the institutions, you know, become private investigators and start, you know, going through the lives of all the researchers that are in the proposal they submit. That's done on an individual basis. And if there's a problem with if there was an untruthful attestation, for instance, that was supplied to us, well, for one, we wouldn't be verifying that. We don't have that level of information, but there's a validation process that could happen with public safety. And if there is an untruthful attestation that was provided to us, then that's where we get into a process with the institutions and say, this is, but I guess the main point I want to make here is that this does not necessarily make the project null and void, and we're going to withdraw the funding right away, right? It depends. Especially you look at innovation fund proposals, right? They bring in large teams. There's a large number of users. I mean, we're just not going to pull the plug on this. We might have to discuss the implication of a particular person in the project, right? But we're definitely going to be looking with the institutions at potential options to still, you know, keep the project going as much as possible. I might want to go back to some of this and maybe see if some people can or want to react on, for example, what Tim said about what's happening at the CLS in terms of gathering information from the external user that come from the facility, and whether, you know, others have looked at something similar like that, or if they see like challenges of doing something like that. Because as I said before, one of the risks we need to look at is the risk associated with these external users, right? So we need to, you know, at some point, I think we need to come up with something that says this is how we're going to be managing the risk for these external users. So maybe looking for some reaction to that, or alternative ways or measures, but yes.
Good morning, Patrick. Lamfo from Canadian Cancer Trial Group. So just to flow through your question there, we actually have a few systems to track how the user access our infrastructure and also application and data. Start off, we have a membership roster. Basically, we track every member or anyone have anything to do with us in terms of general information, for example, the name and the email address, but also tracking what kind of role they belong to. For example, if we have committee member or chair, we will track that. The reason for that is we can use that to utilize overall access to every system we have. In terms of project specific, for example, the trial we do, we actually have a system called Ripple, basically match an all access level based on the project itself. Give you an example, in order to be active on some trial, depend on what your role, we track by role, and as well at fair level, detail what kind of role and duty you have. For example, some people might be able to enroll patient, so that some expect with that they can limit to what they can do, or whether investigator only sign in at the end to approve the data, submit to us before we analyze, that's another type of duty. And also people can enter data. So, and also link it to all the application we have, for example, training, what kind of training for each individual role for that project. For example, people might require GCP training. In order to active, you have to meet all requirements by role. So we really very detailed system, and I'm happy to demonstrate for your team and see how we do that. And that's an additional thing in terms of cybersecurity and stuff. At CCG, we implement quite a few security control, but we also work with Queen University Information System, technology system team, and to do actually a lot more. We even go down to the level where all our staff actually have password management system for people to use. So.
Okay. And with the information you said you're gathering on some of these people and to look them up, do you ever come up with, you know, something problematic? And if you, does that ever come up? And have you, you know, that led to anything to be actioned? I don't know.
Yeah, so the reason we build our extension on terms of access Give example, when we do project with farmer, they come with a long list, sometimes 15 pages long, to respond to their question about what kind of security control we have and access. Second thing, we also get inspection from different regulatory agency and farm ourselves. They have independent groups. So we have to be really on top of these things, and in order to able to do project with them as well at past inspection.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay.
Hi, I'm Jeter Hall from Snow Lab. In terms of data collection, so our users are typically grouped in collaborations of 10 to a few hundred people. So they're self-organized. Often their research goes through the Innovation Fund, so these requirements are already impacting the infrastructure that's going into the laboratory.
Right.
To collect the data, we ask each collaboration to collect the data across the collaboration because these things change frequently. We ask them to report every 6 months on their collaboration, the names of the people, the institutions they work for, the career stage of the person, these types of information, how much effort they're putting into the project. And so we collect that every 6 months. In terms of some of the research security questions that have come up, we've just started asking the collaborations basically if they are working in an area of concern, and if so, if they're working with one of these affiliations of concern.
Okay.
And so that has recently, with this round of the Innovation Fund, we've had our first project say, yes, we are subject to these rules. We do have an affiliation of concern. So now we're working with them to understand sort of their research security plan to make sure it doesn't impact other areas of the laboratory. We're not seeing any issues there.
Right.
And a lot of that's run through the research offices of the university because of the tie to the Innovation Fund. And they've been great partners in working with us to understand and work through those issues. And it's really been very reasonable amount of work and reasonable mitigation plans.
Okay. Thank you. I think the word reasonable is very important here because I think one thing I'd like to explore a little bit with you here, and again, as I said, later during the day if you want to catch us, is some of the resistance, right? Because we get it. It's additional, it's again, one more thing to worry about, right? I mean, for you, but for the research community at large. So understanding a bit where you're getting the pressure, the pain points, and the resistance is very useful for us when we try to devise some of these requirements.
And I would say, one impact on keeping everything reasonable, it's very reasonable right now, but a lot of people, need the training and need to listen carefully to the words because I've seen a lot of instinct on a number of people in the community and in administrations to go beyond what you're asking and implement even harsher concerns, and that will get a even bigger backlash from the research community as well. So I think, these things are prioritized and come down from the intelligence community. This is really a threat-based approach to managing these risks, and we don't have all that information, so really going by their priorities is really the right way to go and to put the right amount of effort in. If you just look at all the risks, then you could spend an infinite amount of resources trying to address all of the risks in the world.
Understood. Thank you. If just before we go there, I mean, I don't know if most of you or some of you have had the opportunity to be to a CSIS presentation about research security and the risks. If you have not, I suggest you go just because I think it certainly marked my mind when I was there, and I think it's useful as well for the research community to sort of understand a little bit. I mean, I was talking with someone else earlier when there are facilities around the world that have been cut with ransomware attacks, and they're not quite backed up to where they were after significant amount of time. So it is worrisome at times for sure. Sorry, yes.
Jason Acker, University of Alberta. So the question really around the information that we're collecting, the first question we had to ask is what is our legal authority as a public entity to collect this information? So we've gone through an extensive review, including a privacy assessment to understand what we can actually collect and what we can't collect. Right. So really important to have that framework at first before you start collating all this information on individuals and then realize that you're subject to a FOIP request downstream and you haven't done it correctly. With that, we know the University of Alberta has come up with a responsible open source intelligence gathering protocol that we're sharing through the Team Canada, through the research security offices across the country. It is built on this framework of really how we do this in a responsible way, adhering to all Canadian and provincial privacy laws and responsibilities that we have under various acts. So really important that you have that framework in place. But once you have that, then you know we have the policies built into this framework are really about transparency and openness and accessibility to ensure that any information that is also collected is done in a way that's going to protect us downstream. If there is an RCR complaint, that we have to now undertake an investigation, and the RCR process and the investigations that would entail have some natural justice built into that, that if this information is being collected in a way that would make that information inadmissible, now you've created some other challenges for the institution. So really important to look at your research integrity process as well when you're looking at this research security process.
That's a very good point. I'll make a few maybe comments about that, but I'd be interested to know later if that involvement, look at it from a legal standpoint, if that sort of curbed your initial ideas, or if that at the end of the day that wasn't a big deal. Because absolutely, I mean certainly our modus operandi internally, because we also obviously CFI is has to abide by some legislation. I mean the Privacy Act for one, and one of the things where, as I said, our modus operandi is we only keep the information we absolutely need to keep. Right. The point is not to suddenly build a big database of knowledge of information about people. This is because I mean that's a liability more than anything else, right? So it's really defining what you need to keep for what reason. And obviously you need to make sure you can actually do that, and from a legislative standpoint. So point taken.
Hello, I'm Joaquin Trapero, University of Victoria. I would like, you mentioned that all these guidelines are applied during the duration of the project. So I would like to go back to the definition of duration of your project. I'm sorry, I'm moving outside MSIs, and maybe I'm going back to GELFs and innovation funds. That is where it's applied right now. A typical CFI project ends when the fund starts. Like So the project will end when the infrastructure is operational, and then the research happens. Is it correct to understand that you only look at while the project is being implemented, or do you want information of, because then you are missing the information of who is using that infrastructure?
Okay, that's a very good question. I think this goes back to the, short answer, final financial report. So that's a short answer to your question.
Okay.
The requirements go all the way to the submission of final financial report, which is when the project, from an implementation standpoint, is essentially completed for us. However, the basis for that decision is the fact that it's sort of the overarching principle that research security is a shared responsibility, right? So I mean, the funders have responsibility, the government has responsibility, institutions, researchers, everybody's got their own responsibility. So, we are expecting, our requirements with respect to those two policies last until the submission of the final financial report. After that, it's always an institutional asset, but after that, from a research security standpoint, institutional policies will continue to apply, and we hope and we're confident that a lot of institutions have these policies in place to make sure that there's a reasonable amount of accountability from a research security standpoint that continues after that fact. But as far as CFI requirements, they end at the submission of the final financial report.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
François Légaré. So regarding your question for the mitigation of the risk, external versus internal, I think the main issue is for the data users. And let me explain.
Okay.
Users coming at the facility or remote users are clear. But I can have a colleague coming to use the facility. In 2 years, this person will meet a theoretician at a conference. The theoretician will offer to simulate the experimental results. I'll never be informed. And then in 4 years, I'll see a paper with an affiliation on the list of institutions with whom we should not collaborate. So I think the main issue comes from tracking all the data users. And I will say for mitigating, the way I mean, it's the first time I really think about this, probably will go with the, well, the way we do it is Australia has a website where you can check the risk of institution. And so I'm using this list in a way to, you know, to mitigate. But we could probably, with our internal resources at INRS, ask people to fill the same form than for an NSERC Alliance project. So we just take the form and we ask our remote users and on-site users to fill that form. The problem is really for the data users.
Right. Do you have, do I understand that some of that concern as well is from the fact that, you know, you might have that publication down the road that uses data, if data is readily available, and they, you know, thank the facility and go like, oh, shoot. Exactly. You know, yeah, okay. Okay. No, I mean, that's exactly why we need to make sure we understand these little things and subtleties.
Even data provided by open access.
No, and absolutely. And we get into this whole discussion that I guess I'm hoping not to go into today, because that's the subject of an entire session or an entire day about, you know, open data, open science, open access versus some of these requirements here. And there's a bit of a balance and an equilibrium, and yeah, I get that. Okay, good. So it's 9:20. I will just, oh, sorry, go ahead. Hi, more people.
Good morning. My name is Cam Ewart. I'm the Director of Operations for VITO, Vaccine Infectious Disease Organization. We run Canada's largest 3A containment facility. As such, we're mandated to do a lot of things. All employees are screened before they arrive, including criminal background check. If you're going into containment, you get an enhanced screening, which can include third-party deep dives by a organization separate, and this is all governed by the Human Pathogens and Toxins Act, by which we're deemed responsible, because we deal with pathogens that are often non-endemic to Canada or North American soil. So there's some things that are kind of overarching that govern what we do. So essentially, yes, if you're going into our facilities, you're going to get a certain level of check. You go into the containment, you're going higher. If you're going into animal containment, well, you're actually not. So it's very rigorously regulated on a kind of a different level.
I think that's an important aspect here that I think it's pretty obvious there's no one-size-fits-all solution, right? I mean, depending, you just talk about the gradation, the escalation, depending what you have access to, you know, the requirements are different. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And I'll probably go to one other slide later where I have some of my backup slides where I can maybe highlight some of that. But that's an interesting point, because, I mean, purposefully here, we didn't make a distinction in most of the questions between external and internal users. You know, a user is a user, and the risk associated might be the same. You have, in your case, you have, you know, specific screening because of the Toxin and Pathogen Acts and things like that. That'd be interesting to know, and certainly our you know, we're very careful not to go into details of institutional HR policies. That's certainly not where I want to go today. But there is this gradation of, you know, what you need to know about the people depending what they have access to. And I think that's an important aspect, which I will use as a segue to go to these slides. I know I don't know how wise that is to just throw that 10 minutes before the end of the talk, but I just want to quickly talk about procurement, because I think that's where, that's another aspect where, like if you go to the first question, like a sensitivity assessment might make sense, right? I mean, it's not all procurements that are as risky or that bring as high a level of risk to your facilities. And in that sense, you know, sensitivity assessments have been, you know, certainly mentioned around as a good practice when looking at procurement, because some cases, you know, research security clauses seem to be a good idea from a procurement standpoint. But they don't necessarily always have to be the case. But it depends what you're doing, where you're putting the infrastructure, what it has access to, what is it networked to, and so on and so forth. So I think every time we talk about research security, you know, as much as sometimes we'd like to have, just tell me what form, tell me what process, we'll just go through this. very often it's not like that, otherwise the form would be not the form you want to see and the process would be not the process you want to see, right? It's more about, let's look at this particular case and say, okay, this one, there's no need to go overboard with this. Well, in this case, maybe there is a need to go a little bit deeper. So sort of that assessment is very often an important fact. So this was in my backup slide. I don't necessarily want to go into that for a lot of details today, but these are also aspects that we're thinking of. They're not necessarily specific to the MSI. For instance, when we look at procurement, it's not necessarily looking at large facilities. I think procurement applies at large. And certainly, I think most, if not all, of your facilities have CFI-funded infrastructure that's coming from our other funding. So there's certainly a bit of a symbiosis there. But I think over the next few months and over the year, you'll probably hear us talk about some of these subjects. So it's a bit of a sneak peek, I guess, if anything else. And maybe I'll go to the other slide, which is a bit more, I think, straightforward, or not straightforward, but I think it's something that's been more in the zeitgeist for a longer time, and it's the unauthorized access to your infrastructure, right? And this is the cybersecurity. This is making sure you don't fall prey to a ransomware and have to shut down for 5 months or fine $3 million sort of thing. It is about the physical access, right? I mean, I think you talked about veto. I mean, obviously, physical access there is of utmost priority, obviously. This might not be the same type of importance in all the facilities, but certainly physical security is an aspect to be taken into account. So, we have some of these questions as well, as in, are you leveraging some of the processes, some of the policies at your host institutions, for instance, for some of you. So we have some of these questions as well. As I said, I'm just sort of putting that a bit of a sneak peek. We might have these discussions going forward. We might have these discussions later today if we see each other in not a lot of corridors here, but I guess around. Right. So other than that, I want to keep the door open if anybody has other questions, other concerns. We have a security research security webpage. You just need to click on this, right? That should work. No, but we also have an email address where Véronique will respond to you if you send an email to either research.security or sécurité.recherche. There you go. Otherwise, you know where to find me, and I promise I will buy you shoes. Thank you.